All right, my friends, welcome back. I just wanted to first thank my 10 newest subscribers on YouTube. Thanks for your love. Thanks for your kindness. Thanks for your peace. I'm glad that this previous video that I put out really spoke to you guys on a very deep, poignant level that you can really relate. Like I said, as we probe into the human condition here, and understand things from the perspective of PTSD, and chronic PTSD, for those of us that have been forged in the fire, like I said. What's important to understand is that, and I grappled with this for a long time, trials and tribulations in one's life oftentimes feels like denial from God or from a higher power or a source or whatever you subscribe to. I do think personally, I'm not going to tell people what they should believe in, but I do think that it's very helpful to believe in something greater than yourself. And I just look at how perfect, things are as far as nature from a science perspective. To me, it's hard to deny that there's not intelligent design at work, right? And I think the thing I grapple the most with is, I know as humans, there's, the human elements, human perspective, the human-centered perspective in the human spirit, right? The thing that keeps our heart beating and keeps us going, even when our minds may not know how to continue on, our biology does, right? And it is kind of, I don't know what to say about, Darwinism and, survival of the fittest and all that. If there's any credence to evolution, we could definitely make that argument that we are the fittest thus far, through natural selection. The ones that were weaker did not survive. But then you also have to ask yourself, for those of us that have experienced miracles that, are proverbially, cast with 9 lives, how are we even still here? And I think the answer to that is, you have to ask yourself what co-creation is, right? Because I know there have been times in my life where I've shown up and realized just me showing up is enough. It's enough. It's about not giving up. Because when you deal with pain and adversity in one's life, it can weigh on a person, right? And I think, and I'm not trying to be melodramatic with you here, okay? If you've watched some of my short form stuff, this shouldn't be a surprise because I did put out in a video about it. But I'm just going to hit on a couple things right quick with you here, just so you know that I'm a real person and that I understand what struggle is. And even if your struggles are new or you can't compare, I don't want you to feel bad. I think this video is accessible to everyone, especially people that have been through deep grief and deep pain that can definitely relate. But even if, let's just say that you've got a lot of things going on and you're right, but you're still just not sitting right with things, I don't want you to compare. What I want you to do is I want you to understand if it's helpful to say, hey, this guy's helpful. It's helpful to look at Zach here and become inspired by seeing what he's been through, and how he continues to stand. But before I get into that, what I wanted to discuss in my own view, I think it's important. This wasn't just all me. I only made it this far because God showed up time and time again. And I'm not sure if you guys have had those bleeding edge moments in your life where you're down to your last $5 and, you're down a roommate and you're looking for someone to rent, or down to your, last few dollars and you get that job and whatnot. I think we've all experienced that. I had a friend that died of cancer. I'll just hit on that briefly with you. I actually had cancer 20 years ago, diagnosed over 21 years ago. is only given a 15% chance of surviving osteogenic sarcoma bone cancer. It's an aggressive form of cancer. I couldn't even complete all the treatment. And as a result, I was only given a 15% chance of surviving it post 2 years. I was also born premature with hyaline membrane disease, only given a 20% chance there. Just a couple of years ago, see, I'm an above the knee amputee on my left leg. So that happened. It was related to the cancer, but indirectly it was an infection. I went through 10 surgeries in an 18-month period. And then on top of that, after a 10 long year battle with it, I finally, after being medically gaslit for years, and there were some good providers in my court that helped me, but a lot that presumed that I was making things up, malingering, whatever. But it was really medical gaslighting. They didn't know, and because it's not observable, it must not be real. But, so they originally diagnosed me with, my oncologist diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so we just treated for the symptoms for years. Excuse me. And it was in March of 2024, under a new primary care doctor. I first I went to the emergency room because I had a really bad pain here and here. And, in 2015, when the stuff started, I did have pain in my face, I thought might be trigeminal neuralgia, but I honestly thought, like, based on the symptoms, and I wasn't trying to self-diagnose, I thought, oh, maybe this is giant cell arteritis, so I went to the emergency room, long story short, and that led me back to my PCP. And the emergency room thought that I was dealing with migraines. So the whole story with that, I worked with 2 different neurologists that couldn't diagnose MS for their life of them, even with all the symptoms I presented with, and I got second opinion. I was collecting specialists like Pokemon back in the day, suffice to say. So, and then, with where things are at right now, and, I think it's difficult to operate as human beings because we always place these arbitrary qualifiers on when we're ready. Once I achieve this, then I'll do that. But, yada, yada, yada. We can literally spend our lifetimes waiting for the right circumstances to arise. Something that I can promise you that I wouldn't have been able to tell you back in 2022 when I had my leg amputated. Growth happens when you go through difficulty. Growth happens when you go through difficulty, okay? It's like the phrase I used to say, nothing worthwhile in life comes easy. And there's a self-discovery process. And there's also, I think, the part that's the most confusing to me nowadays is understanding what I'm responsible for, versus me trying to overexert control over situations, right? So where do I lean into a higher source and surrender versus how much of it am I responsible for that, stems from my control and my ego? And establishing that discernment is a very difficult thing. I think it's only natural in today's world that we feel a bit out of control because there's just not certainty about things, and we hear bad stories, and we've experienced bad stories in the past. And, I know for me, it's felt like, I'm just waiting for that next thing to happen that's just going to, push me over the edge. Am I going to be able to handle that? Is God going to show up? What kind of hell question is that? He's always shown up. God does put you in a position of waiting, and it happens in His time, not at your time. And sometimes waiting can often feel like a punishment. But there's a refining process that occurs. There are times when we experience things where we think our life is literally over. Losing my leg was one of those moments. Having cancer, believe it or not, did also feel that way, just other than the prognosis. But back then, I was practicing The Secret before The Secret existed. I realized, what, if I invite those ideas, those dark ideas in my head, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy, so I better be very careful about that. So I'm hoping that, you can get to know me a little bit better to understand that I know what trauma's about. And so if trauma just started for you in the past 5, 10 years, let's just say born out of COVID and born out of, societal, the feel of society being disconnected. And, like I said, one primary driver would be technology, which seems so paradoxical, right? That the very thing that's supposed to connect us is driving us apart. There was this whole documentary that was put out several years ago called The Science of Being Alone. It was talking about how social media is actually, if you're not careful, it depends on how you use it, right? But the way I look at it is social media is a sea of voices and a sea of things, and there's the algorithms and whatnot, right? And it is kind of like law of attraction, law of manifestation as far as the algorithm is concerned, because it'll train to whatever you program it to, right? And it's like this round robin kind of thing. So I think that, I know for myself, and I think that's very much part of the human element, if you're seeking outward sources or outward validation for issues that are happening internally, you may become very confused by consuming a lot of media or consuming a lot of anything rather than creating. Creation, as we know, there's art therapy and stuff, whether that be music or painting or whatever else, truly invites in healing. But it takes the permission, and I think it's hard as Americans to have the time to bring ourselves down to that level, to offer ourselves the grace, the excuse to let go for a couple hours because we feel like we always need to be moving, right? We feel guilty if we don't. But really, those are societal norms. I think the most truest sense, if we can ever really reconnect with it, how were we when we were children, before we were societally programmed to act the way that we do now? Listen, I think it's great to show responsibility. I think it's also great if you're an empath and you're a earth angel, and how you want to sacrifice and make things better for others. But the simple fundamental fact is, if you don't show up for yourself, you're going to go through burnout, right? Certainly for some people, it reaches to the high levels of entitlement that, it does become a problem. But I would just say the people that tend to worry about that or worry about success and self-sabotage because they're afraid, if I become rich, I'll become that kind of person that I detest or whatever, right? I think we look for fulfillment in life. I talked about that during my last video. How do we get fulfillment? Well, one way we can get fulfillment is sometimes our problems that we deal with ourselves seem a little bit less when we focus on other people's. Now, that can be helpful or not helpful. Certainly, like I said a minute ago, you do need to have time for yourself, and you shouldn't feel guilty about that. But conversely, on the other, to focus too heavily on your own problems and your own affect and the way that you identify, how you identify with your situation, with time, it can become chronically dysregulated in a way that's not helpful, in a way that you're unwittingly making a decision without even realizing that you're making a decision. Ways that this can show up, at least this has shown up for me, is sometimes I can wake up in the morning and just, first thing in my head is just a dread in my heart, like worry about the future. That's where the peace comes in if you can spend time in the present moment with God, with yourself. Free from all the stimulation of social media and television and everything else. I talked about this before in my short form video. Living in your own micro world rather than the macro world at large. We are in the information age where information, we're on a 24-hour news cycle, right? Okay. And I know for me, sometimes like turn on Netflix, it just kind of pisses me off, to be honest, because I'm just like looking through what to watch and I'm just like so indecisive because I'm just like kind of sick of it all. Whereas, originally it was all great. It was all like, oh, this is entertaining. And I think it's the same thing with social media. And I think that's the reason why long-form content that can invite in an environment that's similar to what we're seeking, we can help each other ground back to a fundamental real truth. And as I was discussing earlier, as I'll finish up here, recognize you are valid for the way you feel, but you are not your feelings. And just because you feel a way that you do doesn't mean it is your reality. Matter of fact, it's more likely to become your reality if you identify with a thing, right? As humans, we place so much expectation on things that when it doesn't match up, we're disappointed. But there are seasons in life, and life is about change. We're not guaranteed in life to have a trouble-free existence. It's how we embody it and how we choose to rise above it that sets that example for others. And I'm not going to say I don't have difficult moments. Of course I do. We all do, okay? But it's important to embody the strength that you actually are, that you possess, that you may not give yourself credit for. It's a real lost opportunity if you don't. So you need to practice patience, kindness, and really truly be your own best friend. Take time out of the day to spend time alone with yourself. Live in the present moment with God. Talk to God. Lay your problems at his feet. He knows you better than you know yourself because he created you. We are all made of the same matter, and all these elements are just leased to us temporarily for this shell of a body that we exist in here on this plane. And as we know, energy can neither be created nor destroyed, only can change forms. And we're getting started in the quantum entanglement thing, So anyways, for what that's worth, I'm just basically saying, I think there's an irreducibility to things. And, whether you're talking about spiritual concepts or talking about physics or, whatever, I think they're possibly talking about two sides of the same thing, But going back to the nature thing to just finish this out. Yeah, you look at nature, we breathe out CO2. Plants breathe in CO2, take in that CO2, produce sugar, and put out oxygen. A little perfect, right? We're all just supposed to be told, and don't get me wrong, there were some experiments that happened, I think in the 1950s, 1960s about, taking all the very basic elements and putting them in a vacuum tube and, running electricity through them that, you have spontaneous formation of amino acids, But to this day, scientists and at large, we don't understand how there's no other life in the universe, right? And I also do think that we co-create with the creator. Maybe part of what we're doing here, maybe there's a reason why the light and darkness exists in this world, has to do with us being part of source. We're all part of source. We're all one and the same. And that's also why it's said in the Bible, to not do harm unto others, because you'd be doing harm unto God or, harm unto ourselves, unwittingly. We're all more than ever being called to rise above that and to hearken forth a new way that we can share together, a safe place to offer voices, etc. So anyways, please leave your feedback as always. Thank you again, my friends, for this most recent subscribers, for your views. It means the world to me as I share this on my journey. I do really think there's a lot of important things I plan on revealing here to you. Like I said, this has been an iterative process for the past 25 years. A lot of issues started for me back in 2000. I'm not going to say that I had some breaks from things. There's some years here and there, but always felt like it was one thing after another. Don't lose hope. No, I understand you. I feel your pain. I know your pain. Pain is a relative thing. Let your pain become your purpose. Share your voice. Don't play small to fit in. Stop doubting yourself and your own self-worth. Each of us has inherent self-worth that spans beyond a number in a computer. All right, peace and love to you guys. Until next time, see ya.